welcome back to the podcast. Here for all the parenting questions again. This time, preteens and teenagers, are you ready?
That would give you the easy one.
Started with the easy toddler tantrums, moving on to, we have a lot of parents of teenagers with pressing questions, and it feels like it's go time for them, like now or never kind of issues, or particularly with teenagers, like where did all these issues come from? What just happened? So I'd love to just dive right in. Again, we have Paul and Virginia Friesen here with us.
So glad to be with you.
Yeah.
The first question we got was, let's just start with the obvious technology devices for your preteens, particularly wanting to set boundaries. What do you suggest, and how do we explain the reasoning to our kids?
Well, we've talked with our kids way back in the dark ages before there was technology. And we had a phrase, if you come back from a neighbor in worse shape than you went, you can't go back to that neighbor's house, that friend's house, alone again, because you're being influenced, you're not influencing. And I think that applies to technology as well.
Can you say that again? I need to hear that.
Okay. If your child goes to a neighbor and comes back with an attitude or actions that are displeasing, that are against your values, you say you can't go back there at this point because you're being influenced in a negative way rather than influencing them.
Yeah.
With again, children are all different. Some of our children can go into a really negative situation and they're an influencer.
Yeah.
Others want to be popular and they are influenced. And I think we have to be aware of that. And so where that fits into media is a huge influencer.
Wow. Yeah.
And I think we need to be very aware of what are the attitudes, what are the actions, what's media doing? Is it helping our children? And usually the answer is no. Yeah. And yet there's some wonderful aspects of media, social media, but how are they using that?
I think every single generation has heard from every child, but everybody's doing it. So why can't I do it?
Right.
And I think especially with technology, everybody's doing it. And probably most of the kids that our kids are hanging out with or exposed to have technology. And many of them don't have boundaries around that technology, to be honest. So our children see that and view, well, why do I have to be out of step? Why do we always have to be the ones that aren't like everybody else? But we just want to say it is worth dying on the hill of protecting your child and helping them understand why you have the boundaries that you have.
Yeah.
We think delayed technology usage is a far better approach than policing it from the time they're really young.
That's good.
We have a friend who is involved in development of much of the technology, if we named it. And we were having dinner with them when their sons were 10 and 12. And the 12-year-old said, Dad, why can't I have this device, an iPhone in his case? And Dad said, because you're not ready for it. You're not mature enough. And he said, but Dad, you helped develop this.
Wow.
And he said, yeah, and when you're old enough, you'll get one.
Wow.
And he said, but you made it, and everybody else in my class has one. He said, I made it, I designed it, and I know why you shouldn't have it.
Yeah.
And his younger brother wrote, and I have it, this was, 5 years ago? I have my Bible today, and see if I can get this quote. He says, it takes a really smart person to not allow a smartphone to make you dumb.
Wow.
And I thought that was pretty good for a 10-year-old.
Really good. That's really
It says,
good.
if you're not smart, your smartphone will make you dumb. I think that was the quote.
Wow.
I think one of the things we often hear from parents is that their kids somehow have gained control over their technology. So we would just say, not only delay it, and I realize you're going to have to probably have a lot of conversations of why at 9 you're not going to let them have a phone. But I think more than that, helping them understand that there are many things they don't understand about it at this point. And so part of your job as a parent is to protect them, is to train them, to teach them. Many parents say, yeah, but my child paid for their phone, so we don't have any jurisdiction over it, right? We say as long as that child is under your roof, you have absolute jurisdiction over it. So just some guidelines we give are no passwords that you don't know.
Yeah.
We think that parents should have the perch to overview what's going on inside their child's phone.
Totally.
Because it's really set up, to be very honest, it's filled with landmines on purpose to grab our children. And the things that we're hearing about sexting, about inappropriate relationships, about predators who have access to our kids through social media sites and all of the rest, I think if we're really aware of the dangers, I think that we would not apologize for our standards.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us as parents just don't want our child to be odd. We want them to fit in.
Yeah.
And we have some dear friends who they have gotten this phone. I don't remember the name of it, but it looks like an iPhone. It looks like a regular smartphone. But
Gab phones?
Yes.
Yeah, that's it. Gab
That's
phone.
it.
But there's no internet.
Yep.
And it just limits what it is. And I think what a genius thing. And to say to your child, this is, we don't want you to look odd.
Yeah.
Because if you're a Christian
Yeah.
youth, you're odd enough in different ways of just not going along with evil. You don't want to make them odd in areas that aren't moral absolutes.
Yeah, that's really
That's a
good.
good point. And I think it's not as obvious to us, but if we had on our street parties going on at every house, I wouldn't say, go ahead, go into that party where they're openly having sex or drinking and taking whatever it is. I would think it's an obvious that I'm not going to let you go in there, but pretty much on a cell phone, that's what they're having access to. That's a really good point, and I think that's helpful.
And one other boundary that we really encourage parents, besides the whole passwords, there's none of this hiding the phone, the parents not knowing what's going on. Even though I realize that there are many apps now that are secret apps.
Yeah.
You can't see them if you're looking at the phone face.
Yeah.
But the other thing we really strongly suggest is that all weapons are surrendered by 10 o'clock at night or whatever. They're left in the common space of the house. They're not taken to their bedrooms because, again, we're just hearing so many stories of kids that are texting all night long. And if you're following the studies at all on what this is doing to our kids, the depression rate, the suicide rate, there are really, really scary things connected to kind of unsupervised technology access.
Yeah. And I think even the obvious aside, pornography or predators or things like that, I don't let my kids have friends 24/7. That's just influence in general.
Exactly.
And so it's kind of what's feeding them nonstop. I mean, our simple rule is no devices upstairs. Because we have a 2-story, so you're always kind of in sight. But I mean, I think that was just everyone has different rules for that.
And we model that as parents. I think, again, how much we're on it. It's so easy for us.
It's so true.
Put your phone away.
We were at this 5-star resort, and I'll never forget it. We're sitting by the pool, and there's a family of 5 that came in, and they were there for a good half hour while we were there. None of them ever looked up, interacted, or who went swimming. They just were on their phone. I thought, this is a vacation. So
it just reminds me of a John Ortberg statement in his book, The Life You've Always Wanted, Disciplines for Ordinary People, where he says it's not even necessarily the corrupt content. He was talking about TV. The corrupt content of TV that's bad for us, it's what it keeps us from doing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that principle is really
So good.
applies
That's good.
here.
one other thing is that we have some friends who are in ministry. He's a pastor, teenage kids, and he was so upset that they were texting under the dinner table when they were having meals. And so he said, you can't do that. And they said, but Dad, every time a ping goes off, you grab your phone.
Yeah.
And so they made a decision that from 5 to 8 every evening was no technology.
That's good.
And they all put their phones away.
I love that.
And they made dinner, they had dinner, they talked, they cleaned up, and they talked. And then it doesn't, 3 hours isn't, even 1 hour. If we just said,
But it's all across the board. Everybody.
across the board, because if we don't feel that the world can function for an hour without us, we've got a deeper problem than our phone.
Yes, so true.
I think we kind of answered the second question, which was how do we handle negative friend influence? And I really like your point of it's specific to the child.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't be, we're this type of parent or that type of parent. We let our kids do this or that. I mean, we have kids that are more heavily influenced than others. And I don't even think it's a character flaw. It's more a personality trait. But I think that's such a good point. When you come back, have you been more influenced by them? And being able to, I think, what would you say to parents that don't feel like they have any kind of say or control over their teenagers' friends? Or I mean, it feels like preteens maybe because you're still driving them places, but how would you suggest when you start seeing your teenager kind of around the wrong crowd? What would you be your?
Well, I think at that age, they're able to have a good conversation with you, and you say, our highest value is that you follow Christ, for instance, would be ours.
Yeah.
And that when you're with people who are influencing you, that's not helpful. And you can't be with them. Well, you can't go to school with your kids.
Right.
But we have a couple who their daughter was just being influenced negatively in the public school. And they said, if you can't change, and they pulled her. And put her in a Christian school in this instance. And we were having dinner with them, and the 16-year-old girl said, if my parents hadn't done that, I think I'd be dead today, literally. She said, what my friends were doing was literally, some of them are dead because of it. But it took a lot of guts.
Totally.
Because she didn't say, oh, thanks so much for pulling me from my friends.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it does take a hard choice like that.
But I love that, and you've said it too, but just it's kid specific. It's not like we're setting these principles. My kids can only hang out with Christian kids.
Right.
Or my kids, I mean, we've got, there's couples we talk to where they wouldn't say it like this, but really what they're saying is my kids can only hang out with cool kids, and it's less about the kids and more about the parents. But it's more what's influencing our kids, and that's the most important thing. So I just think that's so helpful.
Which goes to what's your highest value, if we're really honest. Our life verse is 3 John verse 4. I have no greater joy than to know that my children are walking in the truth. And how you honestly finish that. I have no greater joy than my kids are popular. I have no greater joy that my kids are great athletes. I have no greater joy. Whatever it is how you live your life. And I don't know if it fits in, but what I think for our own girls, it was their coming to a personal relationship with Christ. It's more important than our principles. We could harp on it, but once they made that decision, that was critical. And the role we have as parents is to do everything we can to help them embrace Christ. So that means we should be living fully for Him, positively, have them be involved in a good youth group. All the things are feeding that. Like, we'd get a tutor for them if we wanted them to go to Harvard. And maybe we need to get a spiritual tutor, like kids that are a little older that are going to help them, if that's our greatest goal.
I mean, I think it's hard. We almost have to be unapologetic about it, but we've seen the choices we're helping our kids make with friends often affect our friendships. A lot of the families we've seen where the kid is kind of run into issues, it's because of the family friends. And so a lot of times it's hard to manage relationships when it's the kids of our own family friends.
Or family.
Or family.
Extended family.
Yes.
And I mean, I would just say sometimes it's seasonal for our kids. What they could handle at one point, they can't handle now. So it just takes a lot of creativity. For us, there are certain friends with some of our kids that they can only come to our house. Or we can do group things with them, or we have to almost manage the scenario that they can be in with certain friends. And maybe it will develop into something else, but kind of positioning our kids for success in a way.
But you realize what that takes is your involvement. And I think that's, to be very honest, maybe the steepest hill for many parents of teenagers to climb, because especially if they've already gone through the physically exhausting young childhood rearing years. And I think there's this attitude in one sense that, well, once they're in high school, they're independent, especially if they've got a car. Now I don't have to drive them everywhere. And I just feel like oftentimes parents start to really lose touch with their kids because in some senses it's easier and it goes with the child's desires. They want to hang
step
out with
back
their
too
friends.
soon. Yeah.
Exactly. So we just feel what you're talking about just takes ongoing investment, ongoing awareness, ongoing relationship building, ongoing prayerfulness, ongoing life on life with your kids.
Yeah.
You can't afford to release them too soon. And we're not talking about helicopter parents. We're talking about creatively parenting so that there are better alternatives than the ones that lead them to bad places.
Yeah.
But the thing that you said, Sarah, the second part of that is when you say you can only have those friends if they're at our house, and they go home and tell their mom,
Right,
well,
exactly.
you know,
Worse,
Mrs. Burns
your kids
said,
tell their kids and
right,
their parents,
right.
I'm sorry, my mommy says that you can only play at my house.
And so, they say, Mrs. Burns only and she said, well, what's wrong with
That's
me?
offensive. Yeah.
And then I think a lot of times we cave at that point rather than having an honest discussion. How you parent your children are fine. We have some values of what they watch or what they say or whatever. And
Can I call you to have that conversation?
well, we had at the seminary where we are, we had to say that our 6-year-old could not play with another seminarian's 6-year-old child.
Yeah.
And what we just said is when our 6-year-olds are together, bad things happen. So one of us as parents must be with them at all times.
Yeah.
That's good.
So good.